I'd like to call the June 9th, 2011 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen. Here. Mr. Pons.
Here.
Mayor Holman.
Here.
Mr. Farley.
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
First order of business today is council minutes from the meetings of May 9th and May 12th, 2011. Do I have any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move that council approve the minutes as proposed from the May 9th and May 12th, 2011 meetings.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knudsen.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Farley.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Our next order of business is one of those matters of special privilege that we're always honored to do and is a joy to do. And this is a Business Appreciation Award. And I would ask that Dennis White join me at the podium along with Tanya Boone if she's here. Thank you. It's here right now. This is an annual award that the EDA provides, and the award is donated by Fleming, and we thank Fleming Buck for doing that. The Williamsburg Economic Development Authority and the City of Williamsburg are pleased to honor Aberdeen Barn of 1601 Richmond Road with the 2011 Business Appreciation Award. Selection criteria for the award include the time the business has operated in the city, the products and services offered, the innovativeness in providing services, contributions to the community, excellent consumer service, and environmental sensitivity. The Aberdeen Barn has operated for 43 years, opening in 1968, the year before I came. The fiscal year ending September 30, 2010 was the second busiest they've had in the last 8 years. The Aberdeen Barn has been in the forefront of environmental sustainability in the local restaurant industry. Some of the green practices they have adopted include recycling plastics, glass, and paper, changing from styrofoam to eco-friendly carry-out containers, participating in an energy co-op that reduced energy bills by 30%. They have averaged 45 donations to local community organizations per year. They have worked with a number of William and Mary student groups on projects willingly sharing their insights and knowledge. And Aberdeen Barn is a past winner of the Taste of Williamsburg People's Choice Award, most recently in 2009. We are proud to count Aberdeen Barn among our city's businesses, and we are pleased to present the 2011 Business Appreciation Award to Aberdeen Barn. Tanya, would you do the honors?
Thank you. I really appreciate your contribution to the business community of Williamsburg. And it's a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
This is yours.
Mr. White, congratulations. Would you like to say a few words?
I guess I don't need that. I'll try not to get too emotional up here this afternoon, but I'd really like to thank my mom and dad. My dad started Aberdeen Barn in September of '74. He was the second owner of it. I started there when I was 15 years old. I'll be 53 in September. So I learned my business strengths from my father. I learned my people strengths and the love of cooking from my mom. My mom passed away 4 weeks ago and 2 days ago. My dad is in the Alzheimer's unit at Windsor Mead. He hasn't called me by name now since November. But I love him very much. Your thoughts are always with me. And I know my mom's upstairs right now, and she's very proud. So thank you.
That'd be great. Thanks. One more. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I'd like to also thank the EDA for sponsoring this award. It's just one of the many ways we can show our appreciation to the many businesses that do so much for our local community. The next order of business are public hearings, and we have two today. The first public hearing is a license to James City County for communication lines and related facilities in city streets, proposed ordinance 11-02. Because of the nature of this, we're going to do this a little bit differently than we do most public hearings. I will open the public hearing, and council will consider the proposed license in a minute. But initially, we need to see if there are any other bids for this. If there are any other bids, would you please come forward? Seeing none, I think we can proceed with the public hearing. If anyone has any comments they wish to make on this, and then we'll go back to staff for comments, and if there are additional comments beyond that, we'll get to them. But this is part of the public hearing. So, Mr. Middow, would you please state your name?
I'm Robert Middow, James City County Administrator. Your Honor, council members, Mr. Manager, good afternoon. The county is seeking approval for a license to place a fiber optic cable within city right-of-way, and it is something that I'd like to thank Jack and Chris working very closely with us on, as well as your public works folks. We've spent a lot of time together with my folks, and I have Tom Pennington as director of our Information Resources Management Department here, who's, if you want to get into the details, he's your guy. If you're like my board, you want me to be brief. I shall try. The route for the fiber optic line is in your materials, and as you know, we had other options that we could have considered. Actually, that is the route. But we chose this one as the most beneficial, both for us, but as for the city and the other partners that we will have together on this project going forward. This project was originally conceived back in 1989, I think, by Mr. Pennington. He is the father of what we have as a very robust cable system now in our community. And this piece of fiber is part of a 56-mile loop that the county is building that will connect all of our buildings, all of the school buildings, and provide all telephone, computer networking, and video service to all of those participants. We're spending about $1.4 million on the larger project. Again, this is just a smaller piece of it. While we have a pretty substantial fiber capability right now, what this will do is to provide a loop in the fiber system. So it will provide us a great deal of both redundancy and reliability. If you think about it in terms of like a water system, if you get a break in the system, you typically can backfeed from the other side so you don't lose service. It's the same concept. We're building this loop so that we have a much higher level of service and much higher level of reliability in operating the system. Because it is so critical to the functions that we perform, as well as our other partners, anytime a contractor decides to put a backhoe through it, it can be a little problematic. I mean, in our current system, just several months ago, we lost half the county, literally, because of a construction accident. This is going to go a long way to help solve that dilemma for us. Originally, our plan was to install a 36-strand cable throughout to the city, and as we talked to Jack and his staff, we found that one, you were interested, or very glad you were, in participating in this system. So we upgraded the cable to a 48-strand cable, which is the largest that we can put through the conduit. And as part of a licensing agreement, we're making those 12 extra strands that we're not using available for city use, exclusively for city use going forward. The construction timeline is about 3 months, and I think, Tom, we're looking to start in the fall?
When we get to go.
When we get to go. It's very typically non-intrusive types of constructions, direct bore. You've seen other utilities, gas companies, phone lines, things of that nature use a similar technology. There is some surface work where you have to do vaults and connection points, things of that nature, but it's fairly minor in nature. And, of course, we're responsible to restore. We've had cable access in the county now for several years, and at least in terms of our utilization, it has allowed us to save in excess of $1 million, really an avoided cost for cable services that we otherwise would have had to pay for. As we bring the schools fully onto this system and participating in this loop, we expect they will be able to experience some substantial savings, and that opportunity should also be available to the city as you find ways to make use of your piece of the system here. This is an asset that we believe will simply continue to grow in value over time. Just the known uses that we have of this are substantial, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't even know that is going to come down in the future. So putting this in, we think, is a pretty exciting and far-reaching concept for both the city and the county. We would ask for your approval of this license, and certainly here to answer any questions you might have.
Anybody have any questions for Middow at this point? Come back. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Having heard the presentation from James City County, does anyone wish to make a comment in the public hearing? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back to staff for their comments, and then we'll come to council for any comments or questions they have.
Yes, well, Mr. Middow has done a good job of explaining the system and what we're doing. I would say typically if it were a private provider, there would be, in the form of a franchise fee or another mechanism of payment back to the city, but that's not the case in this situation. So the county is not paying for the rights to be in the city right-of-way. However, they are providing the 12 strands that were discussed that allows us to link from this part of the city down to the Quarter Path Rec Center, as well as over to the Community Video Center behind Berkeley School. And that certainly has real value to the city going forward, and will save what we would have to buy to rent that same amount of service from a cable provider such as Cox. So we do see it as a win-win for both the city and the county. We've worked very closely, and our engineering folks have worked on this to ensure that in these tight and limited right-of-ways, we can accommodate the additional conduits. And I'll add just one other thing. There are 2 conduits going in, one that is being used now by the county for this system, a second empty conduit being put in at the same time for the efficiency of that could be used at a future date for other purposes, in which case, and before that could be used, that provider would need to come back to the city to get either a license or franchise as may be appropriate in order to use that second tube. But part of this license provides for that going in at the same time. So again, we support it and believe it's a good thing for the community all around.
Sheldon, is there anything you need to add to that? Okay. I'll come back to council for any questions or comments.
I have a question for Mr. Middow, if he doesn't mind. Would you mind speaking a little bit more about the connection, might not be the best term, but the benefit to the schools of this?
Right now, the school has use of the fiber capability we have in place to do their video conferencing, distance learning. There's a whole 3D video technology that's going to become available they can use. And this simply adds to that reliability. But as I understand it, and Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that by virtue of creating this loop, they'll now be able to have all of their systems, all of their school facilities on this system in a very reliable fashion and provide telephone service that should then be a cost avoidance for them going forward, as we also use it.
And is there any, how does that work in the relationship between the county and the school system? Is that just something that's provided to the school system by the county? Or?
We're just terribly magnanimous.
You do sound like wonderful people.
We are. No, we've seen this as a mutually beneficial project, really, for them. So we've just undertaken to do it. The city will be able to benefit, as is the school. So we think it's good business.
Thank you.
Scott?
Maybe, I don't know who the question would go to, just relative to, you got a conduit going through, you were going to run 36-strand fiber optic, but now you've gone to 48, and 12 would be dedicated to the city. What is the capacity? What does that mean other than, 36 and 12? I mean, is 12 going to offer the city what it needs in the future? Should we be, is there a bigger piece of conduit that if we partnered?
Yeah,
Well,
let me,
I'd ask our IT director, Mark Barham, to come up and answer that with a little more precision than I could.
yeah, I'm going to say it's substantial. It's a lot more than we have now, and I kind of Tom address our end of it, but please go ahead.
The city currently has fiber optic cable that we lease from Cox, connects the municipal building with Quarter Path Rec Center. It also allows us to save money in terms of what we talked about with telephones, things like that. What we're doing here, that's 6 strands that we get from Cox. This effectively doubles that. We use probably less than 1% of what we currently have, the 6 strands we currently have, and this effectively doubles that. So this provides for very much increased bandwidth from now to the future.
Okay, thank you. And what we're talking about is only communications that the city would use internally between the two, Quarter Path and...
It is, but for instance, the signal from this meeting today could make its way from here to the video center. So it's internal, it's city communications, yes.
And nothing that, other than what's distributed from the communication center would benefit the community. I mean, there's no tie-in.
Right. This is not, yeah.
Public access. Judy, do you have?
No, I'm very supportive of this. I think it's another really good example of the cooperation we have between the two jurisdictions. And it's just one more little feather.
Does this, and Bob, this may be a question for you or Jack, I'm not sure. Right now, are James Blair, Berkeley, and Matthew Whaley connected to this network, or will this connect them in a way they haven't been in the past?
They are currently connected, but what this will do is add that reliability loop so that the service level just increases in capacity.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. I agree with Judy that this is, I think, a good thing for the county, for the city, and for the school system. Any further questions? If not, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance 11-12, authorizing the city manager to execute the agreement dated June 9, 2011, between the city and James City County, granting a 10-year license for the installation and maintenance of fiber optic equipment within city streets and rights-of-way.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Farland.
Aye.
Mr. Costa.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Middow. Thank you very much for being here.
Appreciate it.
Our next order of business is a second public hearing, and this is a public hearing dealing with PCR 11-09, 11-10, and 11-011. These are zoning ordinance housekeeping amendments, group home definitions, civil penalties for zoning violations, zoning administrators' notices and BZA procedures, and provisions for temporary health care structures in single-family districts. Mr. Nestor.
I'll be brief. These incorporate changes to the state code that govern the city's zoning ordinances. These are mandatory changes that must be made to bring the zoning ordinance into agreement with the state code. And as you've read, we had 3 cases. One amends the group home definition to add group home means not more than 8 aged, infirm, or disabled persons together with 1 or more resident counselor or other staff persons. There are several changes in our second case pertaining to the zoning administrator and the Board of Zoning Appeals, dealing with various procedural issues that I'd be glad to go into if you have any specific questions. And the last one adds provisions to allow temporary health care structures as accessory buildings in all of our single-family zoning districts. This would be a structure that you could say put in a rear yard. It would have to meet all the applicable zoning requirements. It must be removed within 30 days from the date that the mentally or physically impaired person is no longer in need of the facility. On that one, we have never had, to my knowledge, a question about locating that on a single-family lot, but nonetheless, the state code mandates that we include that provision in our zoning ordinance. So those are all the comments I have. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nestor. Before I open the public hearing, are there any questions for Mr. Nestor? Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing. Anyone who wishes to comment on this action, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for comments, questions.
Mr. Nestor, ma'am? I recognize that we don't really have much choice here, which is always interesting. But could you talk to whether any of these 3 different sets of changes cause you concern as far as the city and what we've tried to accomplish through our zoning ordinances?
No, I don't think so. I think the group home definition is in line. That change is in line with what's already allowed now. We've never had a proposal for a group home in the city, but I think it has a neutral impact on what is in there. The zoning administrator and Board of Zoning Appeals changes, these are just procedural changes that have no impact, and some of them we meet already. Probably the biggest change is the temporary health care structure, and I mean that would certainly be an additional thing that's allowed in our single-family districts, and that probably has the potential of having the most impact of any of these 3, but I don't see that that would become a widespread activity in the city. I would expect that any proposals under that section would probably be few and far between.
Thank you.
Scott? No further questions, comments? I'll take a motion.
I guess I have a question. Can we do this in one motion, or do we need 3 different motions?
You should probably do it in 3 separate motions.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead, please.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the approval of PCR 11-009 to amend the definition of group homes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'll move that we approve proposed ordinance 11-10.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Who wants
I'll
to
take a
start?
turn.
Okay.
If I can find it. Mr. Mayor, I move we approve proposed ordinance 11-11.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
And thank you, Reed, for the work on this, and Christine as well. Thank you. Our next order of business are reports. The first is the monthly financial statement. Anything in particular?
Just point out a couple of things. At the 11th month, or 1 month left to go in the fiscal year, we are, as we've noticed the last few months, our revenue and our spending in general fund is very, very close to where it was at the same time last year. Amazingly close. And that just is symptomatic of the economy in general, that we're not making much headway, but fortunately we've stopped the slide, and that's where we are. I would point out back on page 5, which deals with the analysis of room, meal, and 1% sales tax, that all 3 of those categories show some modest gains in this fiscal year compared to last year. Right now, room tax, we're up 3.2% from the prior year. Of course, we all know that's still substantially below where we were back in 2008. Our meal tax is 6.7% more this year than the same time last year, and sales tax is only at a 1.6% over where we were last year. But at least they're all in positive territory.
Anybody have any questions on the financial statements? Again, I think a sign of the fragility of the economy as we move forward, so we can hope. Monthly department operating reports. Anything in particular, Jack?
Well, just one thing I thought I would point out. One of the metrics we look at every month is the citywide employee turnover rate. And historically, the city's turnover was, and we've targeted to be about 10%. That's what we saw as the norm, say, over about a decade or more, plus or minus from that number. Last year, the turnover rate was at 6.8%. This year, year to date, it is under 5. It is 4.9%. So that's another indication, and my guess is we would see the same thing in a lot of governments and perhaps other businesses as well, where there's not much movement. People are tending, if they have a job, they're tending to keep that job. They're not moving as what would have been the norm in the economy in the past. And again, it's not problematic from the city standpoint at all, but I think it's another interesting indicator of how significant the shift has been in just a few years.
Do you think it's at all impacted by the fact that overall there are probably fewer jobs?
I do. I think that the ability to move is restricted, and then there's also the appreciation that I'm not going to take the risk of leaving a job and seeing what might happen. People are tending to hang on. I also think this is a very good place to work, and people like working here. But that has not changed. That has always been the case.
Any questions about the monthly departmental operating reports?
Just a comment. I think it's interesting. We continue to save a lot of money with the iPads, which is very good. And we saved a lot of money on the budget, not printing all those copies of the budget. So it's a real win-win.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. The next order of business is city manager reports. The first of those is the optimal use of Quarter Path Road. Before the city manager presents his report, I'd like to ask council, I have one speaker's card here. My question is to council, after the city manager provides his report on this, would you be amenable to opening it up for public comment if anyone wants to or not? We normally don't have a public comment period till the end of this meeting, but I have a speaker's card, so
it's okay with me.
Is that okay with everyone? Okay, Jack, if you could follow.
Well, as I pointed out to you in the memo that went out last week, the Quarter Path Road was closed to traffic on May 12 for the purpose of preparing the surface for the Run for the Dream half marathon event, which was done by JSG contractors, former Jack Massey contractors. And once that surface was put in place, we left the road closed for the race, and then at that point I sent you a message which said that we were going to keep the road closed until this meeting in order to make a determination of what to do in the future. The options are, at this point, are really pretty simple. We either go back to the way it was, in other words, open the road back up to traffic. However, in its improved condition, we are going to need to put more in place than we had in the past in terms of speed control to try to deal with that issue, because we have a road now that is capable, smoother, and capable of a lot faster speeds than we had in the prior condition, where, as you know, it was a dirt road that had a number of ruts and bumps in it that, as drivers used it, they had to use it cautiously and slowly. So the question is, if we open it back up, or do we take advantage of this point in time to exercise the provision that has been in the comprehensive plan since the last update, that the road be closed to vehicular traffic and that a multi-purpose trail for walking, running, biking be put in place. So we have taken a look at what that would cost, and we've got a couple of quotes on it. The lowest one is just under $22,000 in order to put in that trail, and then we would need to do some additional work in order to sign and put the proper barricades for vehicular traffic in place. The the staff believes that now is the appropriate time to do that. And we've listed a number of reasons why we think that is the case, pros and cons to opening or to keeping the street closed and putting in the bike lane, and those are in the memo. We've gotten a good deal of public input on this. We've provided all of that to you that we've received, mainly through email messages. And so this period of time we've had between closing on May 12 and now, we had good coverage on it and had a chance for quite a bit of public input. What you see on the screen, just to give you a short kind of walk down the road, this is looking south from the entrance of Redoubt Park, and you can see the existing paved quarter path road at the place that the barricade is in place today. The road becomes narrower and narrower, and then as you move down the hill, this is what you see. Again, the surface with the recycled asphalt material is what you see on the surface now. That's what Gary Massey put down. And on the left, up the hill, if you go back a second, up the hill is Redoubt number 1, which is a sensitive archaeological resource. Long term, if this road were ever put into a standard 2-lane road, it would have to be widened considerably. Additional right-of-way would need to be required on the right-hand side, which is Colonial Williamsburg property. The left-hand side is city park property right now. As you get to the bottom of the hill, this is actually standing on the earthen dam for Tutter's Neck Pond, looking south across the 1-lane bridge that exists today, and the travel lane channels down at that point to cross the bridge. The bridge is actually over the spillway of the dam. Most of the road is on the dam itself. So if this road were ever to be widened again to be a standard 2-lane road, the dam itself would need to be either widened, and this is where the wild card comes in terms of what it would take. It may well take replacing the entire earthen dam. Because of the environmental issues, we are now down in a wetland area. It might be necessary to build a bridge over what is entirely the dam today, with whatever dam construction took place underneath. And so that's why the costs are unknown, because we don't know exactly what a replacement project would take. However, we did go to Gary Massey, who's built a lot of bridges, and we asked him what he thought it would take, and his best estimate, to put the road in, to renew the dam, new spillway, and construct this bridge across. He thought $10 million was a reasonable number. A couple of years ago, we predicted that we were in the range of $2.5 to $4 million to do the job. So it all depends just what's really required. Then going up the hill, now we are in property that is owned by Riverside on the left, and property owned by Colonial Williamsburg on the right. And to the right is the large old city landfill area that's always been owned by Colonial Williamsburg, but the foundation owns the fee underneath it, and today they put a pasture on that land. And finally, up at the top of the hill, where Quarter Path comes out and heads down towards 199, and you see the new Quarter Path Crossing Shopping Center on the right-hand side. So those are the facts. So we put in the package both the comprehensive plan information, the input received from citizens, as well as a timetable of what occurred when council discussed this back in 2005 and 2006. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Clayton's the expert on the constructability issues. Mr. Nestor can tell you about the comprehensive plan. Chief Slogee can talk to you about some of the public safety considerations. So we're at your disposal.
Great, thanks. Anybody have any questions at this point? I'd like to open this to the one speaker's card, and then if anyone else wishes, is that okay? Okay. I have a speaker's card from John Tarley. Would you like to come forward? Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John Tarley, 112 Yorkshire Drive, as of the end of March. Moved back into the city.
Welcome back.
Thank you. We never really left.
No, I realize that.
And I appreciate your letting me speak at this particular point, since it is being discussed. I support letting the road remain open for a number of reasons. First, I'd like to commend, and I know you probably did read Bill O'Donovan's editorial in the Gazette, and I realize that there are some parts in there that may have been a little impolite to members of the city, but for the sake of the general principles of leaving that road open. And I want to speak to just one other issue that he only touched upon there, is the accessibility to city businesses. I read the packet, and I read all the comments that came in, and I just want to be candid and point out I think it's completely inappropriate to comment on Mr. Pons' business being at the end of Quarter Path Road, because there are a number of businesses out down there. There's a reason that a number of those businesses have failed on York Street, between Colonial Williamsburg and Busch Gardens, and that is accessibility. When the bypass for Busch Gardens came in, a lot of those businesses just don't generate the traffic. So anything that we can do to increase traffic to parts of to city businesses. When I served on the EDA, we were always looking for ways to bring businesses in. But if you don't have the traffic counts, you're not going to have that. Now, I'm not saying that the people that this is going to automatically increase the number that we can have a Walmart on Route 60. But anything that can be done is beneficial. I was surprised that fact was omitted from the memorandum as a pro for leaving that road open, candidly. Where we moved to, although we still owned our house in the city at the time, we moved to Kingsmill. That road is the fastest way to get into the city of Williamsburg. If I wanted to go eat at 2nd Street Restaurant or La Tolteca or any of those access any of those places over there, that's the way I wanted to go, even though it didn't look like that when I was driving down it. The ruts were there, and I don't have an SUV, so it was a particularly tiresome travel down that road. But nonetheless, let's flip it around to the people who live on York Street. The timeshares, the hotels. If somebody wants to go to the grocery store, I'd send them to the City of Williamsburg business. Go down here, make a right on Quarter Path Road, and go to Harris Teeter. You want to go to a restaurant? There's some restaurants in there, dry cleaners. If we don't go there, where's the next closest place? Two grocery stores in York County. That's where they're going to go to, not City of Williamsburg businesses. Finally, that shopping center is a city business, yet it's an island to the City of Williamsburg. This is the only connection to the City of Williamsburg is this road. Again, it's not going to make or break that shopping center, but it increases the accessibility that you can go to that shopping center. So, and who knows what's going to happen down the road. $10 million in today's economy seems, candidly, it seems foolish for us where if we could get it, to spend $10 million. But the least to leave it open, to see how it works, to let's use that road rather than block it off. And I realize that it says that in the comprehensive plan. We're 2011 now. Things changed. And I think to support the city's businesses, to connect the city in any way we can, to encourage people to drive into the city rather than around it on 199 into York County or into James City County, we ought to do what we can to encourage that, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Tolley. If anyone else wishes to make a comment, please come forward. If you would state your name and address, please.
My name is Michael Langren. I live at 115 Green Street, which is in Village of Quarter Path. And I'm opposed to opening the road. We were told when we moved here about 2 years ago, we bought a lot, that the City Council had a plan that said it was to be closed, and we took them to their word. Secondly is we walk occasionally on Quarter Path Road, and I'll be really honest with you right now. If you keep that road, if you open that road again, the police are going to have to be out there all the time because folks just flat fly down that road. It's almost like the guys get in the SUVs and the pickup trucks, and as soon as they turn off Route 60, it's hit the floor until they get down to the point where the road gets rough. And somebody's going to get killed out there. Somebody's going to get hit. And then we're going to go back and say, geez, why do we need that road? It seems to me that if you start talking about infrastructure that we can't even maintain now in places where we're backlogged on the infrastructure, to be thinking in terms of a $10 million bridge or whatever $1 million bridge over a place that is literally serves a very small number of people. We've got Route 60 comes in, we have Jamestown Road comes in, we have 143. I don't have to tell you all that. I mean, as far as grocery stores are concerned, yeah, sure, there's Harris Teeter, but there's also Food Line and Food Farm Fresh. So if you're out on York Street, there are other places to go there within the city. It just seems to me that this is one of those things where very narrow interests are unhappy with what the city has decided to do, and now are going to try to change it. And I think that's wrong. I just think it's flat wrong when we just do these things and we say, well, we'll just deal with that a little bit later down the road, knowing full well the folks like us who bought houses where we were told that was closed, that wasn't going to be an open road. All of a sudden, now after we have about 50 houses built in there, someone comes up and says, well, we've changed our mind, we're going to open the road again. And I just think it's wrong.
Great. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak?
I'm John Whitley. I live at 110 Governor Berkeley Road. I'm not representing any organization, group, or business. I think when just that moment with the city manager taking us down the path and hearing and speaking of the sensitivity, historical sensitivity of that routing, that is a first flag to say, let's stop and think about this. When I heard just a moment ago the damnable word of Walmart and that road affording access to such, that just really frightened me. When I look at the number of youth, children of all different ages that are in and out of Quarter Path Recreational Center, I think this opening of this road to vehicular traffic would be asking for a tragedy. I really do. On the light, and you have my thoughts, and yes, I did reference a business or two along that routing. On a lighter way, let's look at what Busch Gardens did several years ago. They took away their monorail that really was quite a joyful ride from the park to the brewery, especially the end result. But that monorail still exists somewhere. And as you probably know, I'm an advocate, and maybe the gentleman speaking before might join me in this also. I'm an advocate of putting the third leg under that financial viability stool. And I'm an advocate for dropping a boat-oriented casino right there off of Kings Mill Resort and Spa. I could see that beautiful monorail just coming right through there, right over 60, right down there to a parking lot, bringing our tourists and guests, letting them stay at the inn, use our facility. Now that's levity, but not the casino part. I'm just really concerned that when we're guided by a document that was brought forward by some past members of City Council, because of wishing to seek and maintain the viability of an potentially historic area, that if we go astray, I think we're setting a precedent, I really do, for future behaviors, and that's not right. I'm also concerned, and I've heard it in the street and other places, that a current candidate for a statewide office is a strong advocate of opening this up, maybe eventually to a 4-lane highway, not quite that, purely to benefit his own self and business interest. But back to the reality. Use your best judgment. Use that which the city focuses toward, which I really want to say is preservation, balanced growth, responsible decision-making. I don't want to see a Walmart anywhere close. And I certainly don't want to hear about a child dying because someone came through that road that you opened. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Again, I thank council for deviating from our normal procedures. I'll come now back to council for some questions. And I have a couple, if I could start. Mr. Nestor, this may be for you. This stretch that we've just seen pictures of from Redoubt 1 to the shopping center, is that the only original part of Quarter Path Road that's still pretty much in existence, or are there other parts of the original Quarter Path Road that?
The most part of the alignment of the paved part of Quarter Path Road from the CW Nursery, or right where Redoubt 2 is, down to the entrance to Redoubt Park, most of that is a new alignment. You can see sort of curving off to the right as you go southbound. There's a portion of the old alignment of the road. As you come down between the Redoubt and the bank on the other side, you're in where the original alignment of the road is. And of course, adjacent to the village at Quarter Path, prior to the improvement of that road, it was much narrower and much closer to the original alignment. The road is still in the same place, but much improved.
And what about it, if you kept going into the county, is there anything left of the original Quarter Path Road?
I'm not sure once you get into the county.
So this may be the only sort of section that's is the original alignment that,
at least in the city,
that the British troops marched up, right? There's in the plan for the Riverside development, there's something called Redoubt Road. Would you tell me a little bit about Redoubt Road and exactly what that would do?
Okay, Redoubt Road would essentially bypass the section of Quarter Path Road that we are talking about closing. It would connect to Quarter Path Road right where the multi-use trail comes back into Quarter Path Road between Redoubt number 2 and the Colonial Williamsburg Nursery. The road will go directly, will go east for a while, and then it will curve down through what's proposed to be a residential area north of Tutter's Neck Park. This road will go down the other side, on the other side of Tutter's Neck Pond. It will tie into Battery Boulevard at the roundabout in the center of the development, and will then you could get on Battery Boulevard when that is completed, and that will reconnect with Quarter Path Road at the entrance to the Quarter Path Crossing Shopping Center.
So that conceptually provides a parallel
correct
way to do this, although that's in the future.
In the future.
This is asking you to peer into the future a little bit, but we've been in discussions with James City County about the country road and the possibility of the city and the county turning that into a linear park that would essentially continue South England Street out under 199 and then parallel 199 down to Mounts Bay Road as a linear park for walking and bicycling. If that were to become a reality, do you see that in any way connecting into this to create what could that create for us?
It could create a very wonderful walking, running, and biking loop. Of course, we have bike lanes on York Street from Francis Street down to Quarter Path Road. Then we have the existing multi-use trail alongside Quarter Path Park to where Redoubt Road will eventually tie in. Then if this trail is created down to the Quarter Path Crossing Shopping Center, then you just have a short distance across Route 199, and then you can tie back into the Carter's Grove Country Road. Connection improvements would need to be made. Ideally, there would be an improved way to get across Route 199. That would be a challenge to do, of course, but the ultimate result could be I guess almost a circular park rather than a linear park, starting in the city into the county and back into the city.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Paul. Do you have
I
any
have a couple of
questions or
questions
comments?
first. Yeah, just a couple of questions. I have comments too, but if I do the questions. Mr. Tuttle, I think a couple of these are for you. When was the road closed?
To traffic?
Yes.
May the 12th?
Of this year. The reason I ask that question is some of the comments we've received via email seem to reflect an opinion or a belief that the road has been closed for some time, but it's been less than a month at this point.
Yes. That's
Okay.
correct.
What does it mean to close it to vehicular traffic in this proposal? Are we closing it to all vehicular traffic?
Yes, except for there would be a couple of exceptions. If emergency vehicle had to access it, the emergency vehicle could access it. By the way, I think it would be police. I don't think fire would probably use it. It would be more efficient for fire to go down to 199, but they could. So emergency vehicles. Also, the Tutter's Neck Pond is owned by the Fort Magruder Fishing Club, and it's a small group of folks that own property there. So whatever key arrangement we would have, we would allow those property owners to access their property. But there's nothing there other than the pond for them to visit their pond. There's no development of any kind. So it's very rare they're ever there. And the only other, if a property owner had to access their property for a particular purpose, or the dam needed maintenance, that type of thing, but not for any public traffic.
So really, it's just potentially the police, maybe fire, but not likely, and the owners of the pond?
Right.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about the speed question? I know the road's been through a number of different conditions over the past many years. So periodically, it's been regraded and it's drivable, but when it's in its more natural state, you could go 5 miles an hour, and that's about, at least I felt that was as fast as I could go on it. What are you anticipating the speed to be in the improved state?
That's a good question. I think you could probably take it at about 40 miles an hour, and it would feel okay. It's winding. If we go down to the next picture, you can see as it heads down the hill, that would be on the high side, but again, you have a number of twists and turns, but the surface would allow you to comfortably go between 30 and 40.
Would VDOT weigh in on the speed limit?
No, it is a city street, so it would be a city determination, and in our code, the city manager is responsible for setting speed limits in the city.
So the city manager could set the speed limit at a lower number, 25, 15, 17? I
would say probably be set about 15.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is one of control.
Or enforcement, sure. And this may be a question for Mr. Clayton, or you may not even, neither of you may know the answer. If it's open to traffic, and let's say the speed limit is 15 miles an hour, and people are respectful of that, but you occasionally will have somebody who's going to disregard. What's the degradation that you can expect over a given period, a month, a year? Dan, do you know? Is this a durable surface the way it's finished now?
It's obviously it's not a compacted asphalt, that kind of thing. It's like a cinder kind of thing. It's got it does compress to some degree, so it's much better than just plain stone and gravel. If obviously no traffic is on it, last much longer, but the traffic on it's probably going to deteriorate. By the time it's ready for the next race, say next year if they do the race again, it's probably going to be it'll probably deteriorate, not like it was, like that you referred to earlier, but I'd say it probably needing some work by the end of the year.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And I think those are my questions. Okay. But I have comments later in case there are other questions.
Any questions?
Has there been what are the specific terms with the folks with the fishing club?
Okay. Well, there are no terms other than they have property. Mm-hmm. It accesses. They need a way to get to their property, so we would want to accommodate.
Could I jump, Christine? Because they've had access on this road, do we have a legal obligation to continue to allow them to have access? What's the legalities of this? I guess.
You may. They don't have any other access to their property. It would be a regulatory taking if we denied them
Yeah, okay.
access to their property, so we would need to make that accommodation.
Yeah, okay.
This is probably a question for either Mr. Nestor or Mr. Tuttle. Do we have any idea at all the timeline for the roads associated with Riverside?
Reed, why don't you speak to where we are with the Redoubt, rather Battery Boulevard and then Redoubt Ridge?
Planning Commission recently made 2 approvals. Well, let me back up. We approved, I believe it was in 2008, a preliminary plat for the quarter path at Williamsburg development, which had the layout of the main streets, Battery Boulevard and Redoubt Road. Just in May, Planning Commission approved a portion of the development plan for the construction of Battery Boulevard. This will completely grade the roadbed of Battery Boulevard between the corporate line to the east, which is just back a bit from York Street, over to where it ties in where the street dead ends at Quarter Path Road. In this graded right-of-way, and this will create 2 ravine crossings, which will be done with fill and culverts rather than bridges, and this will be similar to the way Trayburn Drive was built. So have the complete roadbed graded. In that roadbed will be the city water main connecting our new water tank under construction with the water line in Quarter Path Road. There'll be sanitary sewer main, gravity main, and force main, and a sanitary sewer pump station. So when this is completed in the next year and a half or so, we will have the roadbed all ready for the road. And of course, the site plan for the hospital has been approved, and they should be breaking ground for that next month. So we would expect all that to be done within the next couple years. Now, beyond that, when Redoubt Road would be built, there is no firm timeline for that. I think for the development of the quarter path, the entire quarter path at Williamsburg project, they're probably looking at the next 10 to 15 years to complete that. And of course, the state of the housing market obviously has an impact on when the residential area north of Tutter's Neck Pond would be constructed.
So if you could take me through the plans, you say you were coming from the 199 side back to 60. What would the nature of what you were driving through be on that new road? I mean, and maybe possibly some comparisons.
On Battery Boulevard?
Right. And
okay, on Battery Boulevard, as you come in from Route 60 east, you will come to a roundabout at the first intersection, which is Commonwealth Avenue. The hospital will be located at the corner of Commonwealth Avenue and Battery Boulevard. There'll be a 2-lane roundabout there. So you go around the roundabout, you continue straight on Battery Boulevard. This will be ultimately their town center area with commercial and office uses along Battery Boulevard. Then in the center of your way to Quarter Path Road, there will be what was the original roundabout, which is the intersection of Battery Boulevard and Redoubt Road and also Commonwealth Avenue. You'll proceed westbound through that 1-lane roundabout, cross over 2 ravines, and you will end up where the sweeping turn coming up to the shopping center dead ends in the woods. It will connect there.
Gotcha. And that a portion of that would be through a partially commercial, partially residential.
Most likely, they are working on revisions to their master plan at this point. But this whole area along Battery Boulevard is economic development zoning, and it was intended to be a mixed-use area.
Gotcha. That's all.
Just to make sure I recall correctly and to follow up with Scott, Redoubt Road would have residential use property on either side of it.
Correct.
I mean, that was what was intended. Is there a state routing number associated with this? Is it Route 60, 31?
Quarter Path Road?
Yeah.
I don't believe there is. If there is a number, it's never been used.
If there was one assigned to it, like Route 60Y, wouldn't there be state funds available to whatever maintenance and construction?
If any road in the city were brought up to VDOT standards, such as we did with Trayburn Drive, there was no road that existed at all. Once it was constructed up to state standards, then the city essentially applies for state maintenance funds. And what it amounts to is we get state maintenance funds every year based on the mileage, the lane mileage of roads in the city. And when new roads come into the city, whether they're in a subdivision or wherever they might be, and that adds to the mileage in the city, then that adds to that increment for a state maintenance payment. And the state has kept up with those.
If I may finish.
Yeah.
So it's safe to say the city wouldn't bear the entire cost of whatever it may be.
No, that's just ongoing maintenance. It has nothing to do with constructing the road. In order to construct a road, just as we did with Trayburn Drive, the city would need to use funding from whatever sources it chose of its own funding, or it could use what now is about $200,000 to $300,000 a year in urban construction funds that would be available for the city to use. But that pot of money has come down substantially. It used to be $500,000 or $600,000 a year the city received in state urban construction money, and now it's substantially less than that as the state has run out of transportation money.
Thank you. Any questions?
One follow-up, Judy, if I could.
Sure.
Who designates a road a state highway? Could we designate that and then the state pick up the help for construction, or do they have a say in this?
The state would, if we were constructing a road and we were going to use any portion of state urban funding, road funding through VDOT, then all of the plans have to meet state standards for that roadway. That was just what we did in the case of Trayburn Drive, so that we might have been happy with, let's say, a 10-foot travel lane, but if they mandate a 12-foot travel lane and so much shoulder and so much of this and so much, we have to build it to state standards if we want to use that funding source. Is that what you mean?
No, but we could do that and then say we want to designate this as 60E or 60X or whatever, and then would the state then come and help us construct it? Or,
no, the state designation of a number really has nothing to do with either construction or long-term maintenance. This would be a city street. Now, whether we got someday we're at this or, say, Redoubt Road or Battery Boulevard, or to get a state number on it, I don't think we have one on Trayburn Drive, if I'm not mistaken. It's just, it's not numbered in the state system, and it's not relevant.
Thanks. Judy?
Just a couple of questions. One might be for Mr. Clayton. When the road was open before it was closed on May 12th, was there a problem with dumping with a lot of trash? Do we have to go out there and clean it up?
Yes, ma'am. We have, just from time to time, we'll get couches or trash or whatever, so we do have some dumping out there from time to time.
Get that on
It's fairly isolated.
So people can just go out there and dump? Okay, thank you. My other question actually is for Mr. Tuttle. In your memo, you refer to the Civil War history of this road, but isn't there quite a bit of colonial history associated also?
This was the original road trace down to, I think it was called Allen's Wharf, Kings Mill Wharf.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you to get from the city of Williamsburg down to what is today Kings Mill, this would have been the way you went.
And that's practically the only one left of those original
colonial road traces.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are bits and pieces around if you know where to look for them,
Yeah.
but left in a condition that might look like it did in colonial times. This might be one of the few.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me come back to council for comments.
Sure, a couple comments. Actually, thinking of colonial times, just very different, I think, from what we sometimes imagine it. Well, it depends on what time frame you're at in colonial times. But you get up close to the Revolution, most of the trees are gone. They've been cut down and used, particularly during the Revolution when you're starting to gear up for the war effort. So the land gets totally scraped, and you could see from the city of Williamsburg, from cupola of Bruton Parish Church to the rivers on either side. And we do have, as a colonial roadbed, I think the Duke of Gloucester is still
in part of Capitol Landing Road.
A couple things about this. This is a tough question for me, and I'm not sure what the best answer is. From a land use planning standpoint, closing this road makes absolutely no sense. It connects Route 60 and Route 199, which in our comp plan are two of the three named principal arterial roads in the city. And we're looking at severing that connection when we don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know what we're going to need or what we'll want from a traffic flow standpoint. The other thing is a sustainability question. Closing cul-de-sacs, dead-end roads, fly right in the face of efforts at being a greener community. And read any material you want. Through roads are the way to move people. And by providing more choices, you give people greater access and flexibility. The thought that the replacement for this are Battery Boulevard and Redoubt Road, I'm going to call it a shortcut because it's actually a longer driving distance than it would be on Quarter Path. Redoubt is going to go through a residential neighborhood, and we're going to then be dealing with people who are saying, you've got all this traffic being diverted through my residential neighborhood that otherwise could easily go down this bypass road. And it's the same kind of thing we see in other parts of the community, the same kind of objection. Look at what happens on Newport and Griffin when people don't want to go through the College Corner intersection. It creates an undesirable circumstance for those residents. But I think the interesting thing is I've got several things here. There have been several references to the comp plan, and that seems to be the primary justification for closing this road. But as I read the comp plan, it says that the road should be closed when Battery Boulevard and Redoubt Road are completed because they are the alternative access route to Quarter Path Road. And as Mr. Nestor said, Battery Boulevard is probably a couple of years off, and Redoubt, it could be, well, we don't know. It could be sooner, but it could be 10 to 15 years before that connection is completed. I would venture to guess that the connection of those two roads and the development of the Riverside Tract is going to have a far greater impact on the Route 60 segment, or the side of Quarter Path Road that connects into Route 60. It's going to be far greater than anything that could be generated by leaving this open. When we have thousands of homes, the hospital, and multiple businesses feeding people in and out through a closer connection to the city. But there's the appeal of maintaining it as a bike, pedestrian, non-vehicular, or motor vehicle pathway. And that's something that as a runner, I find very desirable. Except that it's also a path to nowhere. Because if you're going to bike or run to Quarter Path Road, you've got to do it on one of three major arteries in the city, which is Route 60. And then if you're going to go anywhere on the other side, you have to cross a 4-lane limited access highway with no pedestrian crossing, no signalization. And I'm worried that that's potentially creating the greatest hazard of all when you lead people up to a point where their only choice is to turn around or make a decision to cross a 4-lane highway. So, it's a dilemma. I've heard several people express concerns about traffic and young people. And obviously, public safety has to be one of our highest priorities. Or it should be our highest priority, public safety. But the segment of Quarter Path Road that runs by Quarter Path Park is also served by a multi-use path that runs basically, I guess it's almost down to where the road's closed, not quite that far, and then all the way out to just, I guess, close to the Knights Inn where it then becomes sidewalk. And so we already have provided a means for bicycles cyclists, pedestrians to be off of that section of the road if it's reopened. I think long-term, if we ever had the funds to fully repair, maintain this road, I think that what would make sense then is to look at it, and I know it would be difficult, but to look at doing it in a way that provides not only a motor vehicle surface, but also extending the multi-use path the entire length of Quarter Path Road so that we accomplish both objectives and still provide safe pedestrian access along the road, at least up to the shopping center while cars are moving on that road. I realize there are real problems with the topography there, and that would create other issues with whatever crossing we had over the spillway and the dam. But I think that's, to me, what makes sense from a land use strategy, from providing an environmentally friendly, sustainable means of people moving through the community, and one that allows people on foot, people on bikes, and people in cars to enjoy this road, just as people in cars enjoy the Colonial Parkway every day. There's a real attraction. In fact, that's why it wasn't meant to be a commuter route. It was meant to be a connection between two national parks where people in their vehicles could enjoy the scenic beauty of the area. So I don't know which way I'm going, but I'm just torn. I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Scott?
I echo some of Paul's points. Generally averse to cul-de-sacs. Localities in Northern Virginia are moving away from that model due to decreased connectivity between independent developments. Also, share Mr. Tarley's concern for the connectivity to Quarter Path Crossing. I don't want that to become an afterthought, kind of in the corner of the city. At the same time, I'm mindful of the folks in the community that want to use this as a recreational area. It essentially becomes a park if you close this road, in my opinion. But at the same time, I don't see, as Paul pointed out, this becoming a multi-use path and also a road as mutually exclusive. Down the road, those two things can happen simultaneously. To echo another one of Paul's points, I'm nervous about closing this road prior to having any knowledge of any hard data on when the Riverside portion will be complete. I think that's maybe a bit risky. This is difficult. So.
Thanks.
I'd be repeating what's already been said. Clearly, I was on Planning Commission some years ago when the question came up and advocated the recommendation to leave the road in its current state with future potential for development as it had been in all the previous comp plans before. I guess a comment that I have, just reflecting on one of the speakers, having been promised by the developer that the road would be closed. Maybe somebody ought to talk to the developer, because it's never been the intention not to have traffic go through there, whether it goes through that section that's currently in this state. It was intended, as I recall council's discussion, using the argument to change what Planning Commission had recommended, was that we would be able to have vehicular traffic drive down Redoubt Road to Battery Boulevard. So, I'm sorry that they sold you a can of worms. I don't have any other comments.
Judy?
I have a couple. I think we would be making a terrible mistake to open this road. And I think there are a number of reasons. They're very well outlined in Mr. Tuttle's memo, but just a couple of points. The major business here, the business that drives all other business, is tourism. And we continue to shrink that part of the city that attracts tourists. We open this road, we're taking away another thing that might attract tourists, ecotourism, bikers, expanding Redoubt Park, talking about the Colonial Trace Road, all the kinds of things we have to offer here, we take away in our compulsion somehow to look like everybody else in the United States. This idea that adding roads is always a good thing, I can see no compelling need to go back and forth between 60 and 199 for the few cars that were using it before on a really bad road, which can't be good for the springs of your car. One of the emails we got talked about how it was wonderful he could take his Jeep there. It was the only place in Williamsburg that he could go off-road in his Jeep. This is not a road for the community. This is just, it's like a toy almost in some ways for some people. I think there's a safety issue. Mr. Clayton pointed out the road will deteriorate if we use it. We're going to have to spend money to get it back up for the race or for whatever. I'd rather use that money for some of the roads in the city that need work. We've got a lot of roads in the city that could use a little work. And why do it for a road that's not going to be used that much? I think the comp plan does talk about how we need to preserve that area. We still don't know what Riverside's going to do. I continue to believe that there have got to be a lot of changes in that whole area because of the change in the economy. I was on Planning Commission when we saw their original plan. I can't believe they're going to go ahead and do a lot of what we saw. And I think Mr. Farley made the comment, we don't know what we need, and that's right. We don't know what we need yet. And so what's the point of opening the road? Why don't we preserve it? Why don't we preserve what we've got there and see what we need? Because I don't think I have not seen a compelling need for this road at all. And finally, the major thing for me is that of all the memos and emails and things we've gotten, the people who live on the road don't want it opened. And I think so very often public officials are torn between doing what's right and doing what people want. And in this case, I think we can not only do what's right, but we can do what the people who live there want. And I think that's a really important thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I've spent some time with some of our documents, comprehensive plan, statement of goals and objectives, and there's some words that continually come up in those documents. The words like the unique character of this place, the natural and man-made environments of our best places, the idea of continuing to promote heritage tourism and to serve pedestrians and bicyclists. And it seems to me that when we think about sort of those words that we use to describe sort of our vision for the future, that it makes some sense that those words and closing this road have some connection. I also been thinking about this, and soon after I came to Williamsburg, this was about almost 40 years ago, there was a debate about closing the Duke of Gloucester Street. And many of the arguments that I'm hearing now for keeping this open are exactly the same arguments that I heard 40 years ago about keeping the Duke of Gloucester Street open. Well, 40 years later, that decision to close Duke of Gloucester Street looks pretty good to me, and it looks like the businesses that are on Duke of Gloucester Street have benefited from the decision that was made, not keeping the street open. Let's look 30 or 40 years into the future and think about, okay, what would this look like in 30 or 40 years with this road closed, connecting to the possibility of a linear circular park that would give access to the colonial area, the beautiful countryside that we have here, the Civil War heritage site that we have here, and that as I think about the businesses along Route 60, what could be better for them than to advertise, this is what we have right at our doorsteps, your ability to access this wonderful heritage of the colonial times, the Civil War, and the beautiful countryside that we have here to offer. And all of that would be a walking, bicycling trip, very easy trip from there. So as I look at it, it makes more sense to me from a business standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and from the standpoint of how we envision our future to, in fact, leave this road closed and develop it as part of a linear, ultimately circular park that connects some of our most treasured possessions.
Have a couple more comments.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ms. Knudsen talked about we don't need to keep adding roads. We're not talking about adding a road. We're talking about taking a road that currently has public access out of access to the public in motor vehicles, which is what it was designed for. And so we're not trying to pave over everything. We're just trying to keep people's ability to get from one place to another as it has been. When my comment about we don't know what we need, it goes back to the problem we created when we changed the language in the comprehensive plan, which I disagreed with at the time, and that is that we would create an expectation in the public's mind that this road will be closed, and once it's closed, it's going to be closed forever. I don't like to make those kinds of decisions when we don't know what we will need from a transportation standpoint. And look at the impression we've given people by just saying that we're not going to close it now, but we'll close it in the future. And that's been translated to, well, the road's going to be closed. And at a time when we don't even have the contingent or the conditional activity that was going to justify the closing of the road. If it comes back to the comprehensive plan, let's use the language in the plan. And that says this road can be closed or should be closed. Well, I'll read it to you. Proposes closing the center section of Quarter Path Road to through traffic and instead establishing the north-south connection via a new collector street, Redoubt Road, on the east side of Tutter's Neck Pond, connecting to Quarter Path Road just north of Redoubt 2, and then following the existing Quarter Path Road alignment to York Street. This alignment, coupled with Battery Boulevard and improvements to the Quarter Path Road Route 199 intersection, will provide the adequate traffic capacity for Quarter Path at Williamsburg and the adjoining economic development area west of Quarter Path Road. Well, we haven't done that. So why are we talking about closing the road when we haven't met the point that we used to justify the closing of it? That's the part that I'm struggling with on the closing. I agree with all the enhancement that it offers from a tranquility perspective, of peacefulness, and ability to appreciate things in a much more peaceful way when you don't have motor vehicle traffic going by. I completely agree with that. But let's talk about it when the other conditions have been met that are in the plan. That's I think, the biggest point I'm sticking on.
And to build off Paul's point, you're talking about a circular park, bike access. I'd be more than happy to do that once those things, the other pieces are in place. We can close it as that's coming online. Hopefully, that would be in accordance with what goes on at Riverside.
I have one question for Reed. This has come up. As I looked at the plans for, and I know this is subject to change, for Redoubt Road, I got an impression that would look more like Mounts Bay Road going into Kings Mill, not sort of housing fronting on the street, but being an access road where there would be housing developments off of that. Am I correct there, or am I misremembering?
It was designed in the approved preliminary plat to be a two-lane road. The original concept was to have parking on the sides of the road and sidewalks on either side, and the road lanes were to be wider to allow for both bikes and cars. There was some very conceptual building locations showing there may have been buildings with direct access to the road. There would be a lot of houses that would access off of the side streets, but it was never detailed out in particularly great detail.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Any further comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just we talk about we need to leave it open now, and whatever Riverside does and whatever roads, then we can close it later. I think we need to remember that once we open it, it's going to be really hard to close, given this discussion. I think that's, to me, the biggest problem. What I have found is once a road is open, it's open.
Wait a minute. It closed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but temporary for the race. I mean,
so
and now we're having
is the
this
justification
argument
for closing it?
But if we open it up And then Riverside comes in and does everything, and we say, okay, Riverside's got the roads, now we can close Quarter Path and turn it into a bike trail, hiking trail, whatever. The arguments against doing that are going to be even more, I think, profound.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I do. Because once it's there, people think it's there, and it's there forever.
I would only counter that it is there, and it's only been closed for 16 days.
But it was very lightly used, and as Mr. Tuttle pointed out in his memo, this is our chance. This is our chance to do it right.
Okay, anybody want to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that City Council authorize the city manager to close the center section of Quarter Path Road to vehicular traffic and construct a 10-foot wide paved multi-use trail, and further that the existing right-of-way of the center section be preserved in the event that unforeseen needs necessitate further road improvements.
Do I have a second? If not, I'll second that. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Nay.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Farley?
No.
Mr. Foster?
Nay.
Motion fails. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the public input to this. This has been a very good example of public city interaction. Thank you, and thank all of you who came today to participate in this. Our next order of business is the Blatant Site Housing Production Project CDBG application requirements, proposed resolution 11-08. Ms. Miller, would you?
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. As you're aware, the city submitted a Community Development Block Grant application, or CDBG application, to the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development in March of 2011. The application was for the Blatant Site Housing Production Project. The CDBG funds, if awarded, would be used for the relocation of existing storm sewer on the property, construction of a new storm drainage system, construction of a new parking lot, and for construction of a courtyard, landscaping, stormwater retention pond, and lighting. We anticipate hearing whether or not we're awarded these funds sometime this month. DHCD requires that all block grant items, or certain block grant items, be approved and advertised by a governing body before June 30th, 2011. These items that need to be approved before this deadline include a fair housing certification, a local business and employment plan, a non-discrimination policy, a grievance procedure, and a residential anti-displacement or relocation assistance plan. These are all plans or procedures that are required for all CDBG projects across the state. It's our recommendation that City Council approve proposed Resolution 11-8 and approve the proposed local business and employment plan, the non-discrimination policy, the grievance procedure, and the residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan as required by DHCD for all block grant projects.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Ms. Miller?
No questions. Any comments? It's just an interesting example. I'm sure these are all good things, but it's amazing the amount of work. It almost borders on what one might consider red tape that you have to go through in order to accomplish
it doesn't
something.
border.
So anyway, thank you very much for your efforts in this regard.
Anybody else? I assume there have been past behaviors that have generated some of these types of requirements, but they can appear onerous at times. Any further comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council approve proposed Resolution 11-08 and approve the proposed local business and employment plan, non-discrimination policy, grievance procedure, and residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan as required by DHCD for community block grant projects.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Farley?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is the Regional Fire Department Mutual Aid Fire and Rescue Service Agreement, proposed resolution 11-07.
Chief Dent will give this review.
Chief, welcome.
Thank you.
You look dapper today, as always.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Hallman, members of council. The Hampton Roads Fire Chiefs Association meets on a monthly basis with the mission of enhancing fire, rescue, and emergency medical services. This meeting also provides a forum in which we can discuss ideas and issues that are common among the jurisdictions so we can each improve in our delivery of services. One of the initiatives that surfaced out of these meetings was the idea of expanding our mutual aid agreements into a regional mutual aid agreement. The proposed agreement would allow for a region-wide emergency response in the event of a large-scale emergency. The proposed agreement provides for mutual aid assistance to and from participating jurisdictions for incidents involving fire, emergency services, and rescue. The 16 cities and counties that would be participating would be the jurisdictions, the cities and counties represented by the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. The decision to provide assistance would be made by the receiving department when that request was made. We're under no obligation to provide the assistance. At the time it's requested, it would be dependent on the resources that they're requesting and the availability of our ability to cover the city based on what they were requesting. Obviously, as one of the smaller jurisdictions, this benefits us, but more than likely in a wide-scale emergency, we're going to be requesting additional resources rather than providing that to some of the larger jurisdictions. However, this agreement does not alter our current mutual aid response procedures that we have with our neighboring jurisdictions of James City County and York County. On a daily basis, they call, we go. That's a standing agreement and response procedure that we now have in place. As you're aware, we have some other mutual aid agreements with other Hampton Roads jurisdictions, and this agreement would supersede those existing agreements and combine them into one single document. We're fortunate we don't have, some of the other localities have many more mutual aid agreements than we have, but it really takes all of these and combines them into one single document, which provides everybody that mutual aid assistance agreement, but it also, the maintenance of those agreements, it really narrows it down for the localities to only focus on that one agreement. Each of the jurisdictions' legal departments have reviewed this agreement, and they've all agreed on the language provided in the agreement. And Ms. Shelton worked on that with the other legal departments with the jurisdictions that are participating. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about the proposed agreement.
Anybody have questions
I have
or
one
comments?
question. Chief, could you talk a little bit about how we would formulate a response, using a hypothetical? Let's say there was some significant issue in Norfolk. Now, I know it's hard to imagine one of our fire engines making it all the way down there or more through the tunnel and doing that. But if something happens and the decision is made that there are resources available, is there a mechanism whereby Williamsburg, James City County, and York County collectively make that decision about the combined resources and what can be distributed, or is it individually up to each locality?
It would be individually up to each locality. As I said earlier, first of all, our number one concern would be to make sure that the city of Williamsburg is covered. And then each locality would make that decision individually. Again, it's not likely that the larger jurisdictions, Virginia Beach, sure, Newport News, are going to be requesting resources from us because they understand the size of our department and that we don't have as many available resources as they have. If we have something available to send them and we make that decision that we have it available, even if the possibility of calling in some extra folks to staff apparatus, then we would make that based on the request that was made.
I guess another way of maybe asking the question is, because of the mutual aid agreement we have with those two neighboring jurisdictions, is there any intention of consultation beforehand so that you're looking at the collective assets for the mutual aid area and determining which of those, when put into a pool, makes sense to send to another jurisdiction?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Okay. And one of the things we work with very well with York County and James City County is if we're aware of an incident that's even drawing their resources to a particular incident in their city or county, or in the two counties, that we're able to relocate apparatus to a certain area to help them cover their district, which could happen in a region-wide. If James City elected to send some apparatus, say, to Norfolk or Virginia Beach or Newport News, they may request us to backfill one of their stations to cover that area while they take those resources to those jurisdictions.
Thank you.
And could I
Yes.
add one thing? There's also specialized equipment in various jurisdictions, and this is at least what I understand from talking with Chief Dent. And the request may be as specific as you have this additional equipment or these specialized skills, and we have a situation where we need these. So it doesn't necessarily mean a fire truck is going to go. The request might be for some other type of rescue service or some specialized piece of equipment that can go on any city vehicle.
Or personnel who have
Or
certain skills.
specialized teams, dive teams, hazmat teams, technical rescue teams. It doesn't necessarily mean that a piece of equipment's going. They may just, because they may have those resources, but they just need additional staffing trained in that particular skill to assist.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Dent?
Just kind of maybe rhetorical. I think in general, it's always good to help our neighbors whenever we possibly can. Before this agreement, would we not run down to Virginia Beach if they called?
If they made the request and we had the resources available, we would have done that prior to this agreement. Right. But that's one of the reasons for this agreement, to make sure that everybody's covered under one agreement with all of the localities agreeing on the same language in the agreement, which amazingly it was a short process. Some people envisioned it being a long process for everyone to agree on the language, but it really was a short timeline that this agreement came about.
This is very similar to the other mutual aid agreements that all the jurisdictions have in place with various other jurisdictions. And what this agreement does that would not be in place with an informal sending equipment or personnel is who's in charge on the ground once they get there and how those commands are issued and who's ultimately responsible for what.
Yeah, thank you. That helps. Any reason why we shouldn't do something like this? Why we shouldn't participate?
No, absolutely not. In fact, as I said earlier, I think it benefits us more because we don't have the resources that other folks have that would be available to us with this agreement.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve Resolution 11-07, a resolution approving the terms and conditions of an agreement for mutual aid and fire rescue services and authorizing the execution and implementation of the agreement.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Our next order of business, thank you, Chief Dent. Our next order of business is a supplemental appropriation for general, sales tax, utility, and law enforcement block grant funds, proposed resolution 11-06.
Yes, Mr. Sarah is at a Government Finance Officers Association meeting, so I'll give this report. This provides for a new set of definitions for fund balance following the standards established by the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, and they put out a circular which says when you describe your fund balance in your comprehensive annual financial report, these are the 4 or 5 categories that you should use. So it doesn't change anything in substance, but it does change what you'll see in the CAPR report, and particularly you'll see now assigned fund balance and unassigned fund balance. And effectively, most of the fund balance the city has in the general fund will show as unassigned fund balance, meaning it can be appropriated. The resolution does provide the existing policy that the city has, which it's a intention to maintain a 35% fund balance in order to as a rainy day fund. So the recommendation is you adopt the resolution, which will do that.
Are there any questions or comments?
I think we moved from item 4 to item 5.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No.
This is a supplemental appropriation.
Just for anybody following on their agenda.
Let me go back to that.
But it's still a great explanation.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
No, why don't we just go ahead and...
If you would prefer, we could just
Okay, why don't we go ahead and
Why
do
don't
that
we go
when we
ahead
come
and
back to
do the fund balance since it's been described to
I
us?
think he was just testing us.
Anybody have any questions about or comments regarding the fund balance policy?
My only comment would be, greater definition within our reporting gives us better information, so I think it's a good thing.
And it is simply a reporting structure. It has no bearing on our policy or the way we carry that policy out.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that the City Council approve Resolution 11-05, a resolution establishing fund balance policy as required by Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, Statement Number 54.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Vincent?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor
Aye.
Holman? Mr. Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye. Okay, now we can go back to supplemental appropriations.
Right. This provides for a supplemental appropriation covering both general fund, sales tax, and CIP fund, utility fund, and the law enforcement block grant. These are grants which the city has received over the course of the last year, which need to go into the budget, and therefore will be then formally approved in the budget for appropriation. So I can go over the grants if you'd like, but they're pretty well things that we're used to see from year to year.
Would you mind? I think it's helpful for people just to hear.
Yeah, under the general fund, there are 5, including a VML safety grant, a planning study grant for the Blayton project, a justice assistance grant, and also a park service grant called for Waller Mill. Those are all relatively small, plus a $25,000 grant for radiological emergency services through Dominion Virginia Power. So those are the general fund ones. Under the sales tax, there are 2. One is a FEMA grant to firefighters in the amount of $59,677. That was used for the diesel exhaust system at the fire station. And a VDOT grant that was coming through from federal stimulus money in the amount of $582,580 that was used for street resurfacing. Utility fund, we received a $1.65 million proffer from Riverside for the water tank that is now under construction, so this is formally receiving that and rebudgeting it. And the last one is a law enforcement block grant of $3,721.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
It's all good news.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council approve proposed Resolution 11-06, a resolution amending the general sales tax, utility, and law enforcement block grant funds for the City of Williamsburg, Virginia, for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2011.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Vincent?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye. City attorney reports. Any unfinished business? Do we have any new business? I don't think we have any appointments at this point in time.
Before we move on, I wonder if we couldn't go back to Quarter Path Road just briefly. One of the things that we all know where we stand today, I wonder if there isn't a way to offer some traffic calming measures. If since the road's going to be open to traffic and there's concern about speeds and the degradation of the road, if there isn't, something that maybe the city manager can look into with maybe Mr. Clayton and come back with a recommendation just to help calm that traffic.
Or if they may be able to just implement it without necessarily coming back, but reporting on it would be helpful to know.
I'd like to know what it costs
Well,
when we get there.
I think nature will take care of some of that.
Yeah.
well, I assume that we open the road back up without further action of council, so it's over. So my guess is we need to post some speed limit signs, and I wouldn't know what else to do.
Well, I offered up maybe something to think about. Maybe something will come to you.
Speed bumps?
Okay, that brings us to our final agenda item for the day, which is open forum, which is a time for anyone who wishes to address City Council on any matter. If you so wish to address City Council, please come forward. And if you do, state your name and address. Seeing no rush on the podium, I'll go back to council. I think we have one item for closed session.
We do. Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Vincent.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
We'll take a 5-minute recess.